Good evening and welcome to the Black Consciousness Festival and one of our stellar 20 conversations for 2020. Thank you for joining us on our Zoom webinar or on Facebook Live. The festival provides a global online platform for the commemoration, celebration, and sharing of vital histories and stories that boost the awareness and impact of the pride, power, and practice of people of African descent. The festival builds awareness around how each of us can take the necessary steps for restitution and reparation. Your conversation lead tonight is Nika Luke. She has over 14 years of practical senior management experience in communications, corporate brand, business development, film festival management, and film industry development across private, public, and non-profit sectors. She's a Fulbright scholar, worked in the burgeoning Caribbean film industry for the last 7 years, first as External Relations Director for the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival, and most recently as General Manager and Film Commissioner of the Trinidad and Tobago Film Company. In these roles, she has had a direct impact on the development of the film industry in Trinidad and Tobago and has built a valuable regional and international network. Welcome and enjoy tonight's conversation.
Thank you, Sean, and good evening to everyone. Good morning to some who are 14 hours ahead of us. Thank you very much for joining us for this conversation. It is my pleasure to lead this conversation with this group of guests. All, I think, have a lot to kind of share with us tonight in terms of the overall theme of Black consciousness as it relates to the festival, but also in terms of what we're talking about in terms of the Afro-Caribbean experience within the creative industries. So I will briefly introduce each of the gentlemen on the panel or in the session this evening, and then we'll get into some conversation. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Rudolph Walker, who is an actor of stage and television in the UK. He's born in Trinidad and Tobago, but has spent, it says here, 42 years working on stage and screen in the UK. We also have with us Mr. Christopher Johnny Daly, who is an actor, comedian, radio and TV personality in Jamaica, an award-winning theater practitioner, and he's one of Jamaica's most outstanding stage talents. We also have Paul Price, who is a Trinbagonian actor based in New York City. Paul is an actor of stage and screen. He's also an educator, and most recently, and certainly is in the process of directing a feature film. So it'd be great to hear from Paul, his experience in all these different arenas of the creative industries. And then finally joining us is Storm Salter, who is joining us from Jamaica. Storm is a filmmaker and a visual artist, and has a lot of experience working in both commercial work and also creating work that has his own particular voice stamped into it. With his recent second feature, Sprinter, Storm certainly represented, I certainly feel like he represented the Caribbean abroad with the reach that that film had in what could be considered commercial in industry spaces. So this is our group of guests for tonight, and it's my pleasure to lead this conversation. First, I'll ask each of the gentlemen to introduce themselves and share with our listening audience something about, about your own experience, something about your background, and then we can get into a conversation. Mr. Walker, I'd love to start with you.
Oh, wow, Mr. Walker. All right, yes, I, as you said rightly, that I born in Trinidad. I left Trinidad in 1960. for the UK, and I have been there ever since. Should I say, fortunate enough to be one of the sort of leading actors. I don't want to say Black actors because, you know, I'm just one of the leading actors in the UK at the moment, and I am involved in one of the most successful television series called EastEnders. Some of you who are old enough to remember Love Thy Neighbor, that was transmitted right across the globe, and especially in Trinidad, which was a huge success in the 70s. I was awarded the CBE recently over Christmas, and then that can lead to all the questions that you want to ask.
Absolutely. There's a lot for us to talk about there.
Mhm.
Christopher, can you share something about your background with us?
Thank you very much. It's certainly a pleasure to be a part of such an esteemed group of creatives. I started my career very, very young. I started at the age of 9 years old and was a part of what can be considered to be one of Jamaica's iconic TV programs called Lime Tree Lane. I quickly fell in love with the acting side of things and theater. Did theater from the age of 14 until now. I'm presently directing theater because I have been doing stand-up comedy for the last 12 years. And I've been working on that side of the creative muscle. I've had quite a bit of success in the creative arts, stand-up comedy in particular, but I've also done one or two films. I've featured in one or two films as well. It's been a great ride that I continue to enjoy.
Wonderful. We look forward to hearing more from you. And I must tell you, Jamaica is second home after Trinidad and Tobago. So I feel an affinity for this panel as well. I did my first degree in Jamaica. So
awesome. I must also tell you, I'm so excited. I'm seeing Rudolph Walker. I'm in the same group with him right now. I've seen him so many times on EastEnders. It's a pleasure, sir.
Blessings. Thanks.
Wonderful. Paul is joining us from South Korea. So he is 14 hours in the future. Paul, share with us a bit about your background. Thanks for joining us tonight.
The future is bright. Don't worry, the future is fine. Well, yes, it's a pleasure to be here and joining such a wonderful panel. So thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I've been based in New York for about 15 years. And primarily as an actor, but ventured into producing and writing and directing. So I'm excited to bring forth my feature film next. Well, with the pandemic, there's a lot of things on hold, but yeah. And I also teach quite a bit. I'm also on the faculty at Brooklyn College teaching acting there as well. Yeah, so that's kind of it in a nutshell, and I'm super excited to share my thoughts.
Wonderful. And Storm Salter joining us from Jamaica. Share with us a bit about your background.
Blessings, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Well, you know, I'm from a very large family that full of creative people. You know, both my parents are creatives and are like artists in their own right, even though they didn't really do visual arts or filmmaking necessarily. But we definitely, from a very young age, I was fully encouraged to be creative and to express myself that way. And I tell stories in a lot of different mediums. You know, I started with photography, that led to cinematography, and film to me is kind of almost like the ultimate art form because it combines so many things. I also do visual arts, etc. And you know, for me, my goal really, you know, I'm a director who works in the commercial world and in film, and I write my own stuff, right? And I'm also a director for hire, so to speak, you know, or I can be. Whenever there's material that I am developing myself, it is always centering, you know, Caribbean characters, Caribbean points of view, whether it is in the Caribbean or Caribbean people outside and in other parts of the world. I think if there's one thing as a storyteller that I feel like I can help to build is how someone with the very unique environment of the Caribbean in your growing, where you're from, however, how you view the world, because we are pretty unique. You know, there's certain things that people are just figuring out how to process now that we figured out a long time ago.
Yeah.
You know, we have ways of valuing creative expression and just a certain freeness in a way, but also, you know, the Caribbean history is there's so many cultures from all over the world that converged here. So we have an interesting outlook, and my goal whenever I can is to put those voices into storytelling, you know?
Brilliant. And that's actually something I do want to dig a bit more deeply into in the course of the conversation. So thank you so much for sharing with us a bit about your background. I want to start with a question around the idea of ritual. Do you have a practice or a ritual that you go back to when you're creating at any stage of the process of creating, whether as an actor, as a producer, as a director? Is there something that gets you centered into that activity of creating at whatever stage of the process you're in? Rudolph, can we start with you?
Oh,
I won't always start with you, I promise.
You have so far. Well, I most of the time, I mean, and this is not just when I'm creating, it's just that I always go back to my childhood. I always go back to Trinidad. Whatever I do, whatever I create in the UK, most of the time it's centered around my upbringing, my life in Trinidad. I have this thing a phrase that I use quite often, is that my navel string was buried in Trinidad. And for that reason, I still call Trinidad my home. When I'm in the UK and I got to refer to home, 99% of the time I use Trinidad as my home. So all the work that I have done, most of the work that I have done over the years, be it Shakespeare, be it whatever, I use as my base, my launching pad. A Caribbean man, a Trinidadian man. Very rarely do you find me being labeled as an Englishman in the UK. No, I think some of you and the guys the artists would understand more or less where I am coming from, because that to me has always been so important. And especially in a society that we are living here in the UK, it is important that I never, ever lose my identity. And I think one of your speakers said just a few minutes ago about the richness of the Caribbean, the richness of Trinidad, the richness of Jamaica. And that is something that we have to hold on to and at no time lose that. Now, I hope that is getting near the answer that you...
I think so. I mean, I think the idea of going back to the ritual of going back to what is special to you or inherent to you as an actor based in the UK is the fact that you are a Caribbean man. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Paul, what about you? I mean, you've been based between Trinidad and New York, mainly New York for quite some time. What ritual do you have that gets you into, whether it's, because you teach a lot as well. So in terms of your teaching or in your process now of creating this, your first feature film, what is it for you that might be your ritual?
Well, I think for me, it always comes down, I think, similar to Mr. Walker. I think there is this sense that it has to be personal. It has to be something that comes from, like I had a class just before jumping on here, and the question of it has to cost you something, and it has to come, it has to, it has to cost you on some level, and you have to be illuminating some sort of truth about yourself, your own self-discovery, or your part of the world, you know, in the Caribbean where you're at. And I think that's always the ritual, I think, for me, in terms of what is at stake for you, what is costing you in this, why are you doing this? Like the why is what are you offering that's going to serve the audience, that's going to be looking at your work and the story, and how is that illuminating something about yourself, about this community, about this story? How are you serving and increasing the souls that are communing with you, you know? So I think for me that is the big thing. And I you know, this you know, on the one hand, it might sound that this sounds controversial or anything, but you know, there is this sense that that you're representing the Caribbean stories and identity, but also it's an identity, or it's you're connecting with human beings, you know, you're with souls, you know, and there's a truth in that, and I think the package in which that comes in could be of many different. It could look very differently, you know, and I am all for that. And I think once you travel, and my experience, you travel all over the place and you meet different people. People are the same, do you know? People are at the core very, very similar. So to me, I that's what I try to get at. Like, what is the central truth?
It's like a grounding for you to keep going back to that idea.
Yeah, I think just going back to the truth of who you are as a human, and I think that kind of connects. And the package in which you tell that various story, whether it's a Caribbean lens, a Black lens, or European, Chinese. And I think what Storm says is really interesting, because we kind of have all of that kind of runs through our veins, although it may not look so on the pigment. We you know, you could be Christian and go into a puja, and then with your Chinese friend, right? So it's kind of like, so yeah.
Great. Christopher, what about you as a stand-up comedian working in theater? From that perspective, what is it for you? What could be your ritual going into that kind of work?
Thank you. Absolutely. I can connect with everything that has been said so far. One of the things that I face constantly when I'm doing stand-up comedy, and not necessarily talking about doing it at home in Jamaica, but more so when I travel, is to remember who I am, and also to carry who I am with me, and to ensure that I express that on stage unmistakably, but also with clarity, so that I can be understood. One of the things that make us uniquely Caribbean is how we speak, our tones, how we sound to people. And it is a challenge for stand-up comedians from the Caribbean to sometimes open up doors because of our accents. And sometimes before I perform, I remind myself that I'm performing to an audience that may find my accent off-putting, or we may have so different cultural norms for sure, because there's nowhere as unique as the Caribbean. Right. And so I use that sometimes as my platform.
Right.
My fodder for comedy.
The way into the conversation with
Absolutely. Them. The different cultures that we bring, the energy, the spice, the sunshine, the brightness that we bring, and juxtapose that to perhaps a very bleaky London. And that is my window. That is my window as a comic. But I always start by ensuring that I remind myself who I am, and about how uniquely we are. We express ourselves.
So a slight follow-on to that, for you in particular, when you perform abroad as a stand-up comedian, do you lead with Jamaican, or do you lead with Caribbean in terms of your identity?
I do both, but I'm obvious. The Jamaican-ness is so strong that I do certainly lead with that. I remember when I was representing the Caribbean at the funniest person in the world, I always promoted myself as a Caribbean comic.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because I was the only Caribbean comic in
Right.
that group of people. And so I truly felt like I was representing the region and not necessarily Jamaica alone.
Nice.
Because I do travel to places like Trinidad from time to time, and I've embraced so much of the other cultures in the Caribbean.
Brilliant. And Storm, what about you from the point of view of, let's say, your commercial work, as opposed to your personal work, because we'll get into that. Do you have a way into creating work for other people as a director for hire? Is there some ritual that you go to in order to do that kind of work?
For me, you see, once I can get excited about something,
Mm-hmm.
my creative juices just start going, and it's like I can't even deal with it. Like my reps are like, you have too many ideas, you need to like chill, right? But so for me, I do try to find something in the story that I can connect to, or kind of characters or archetypes or larger thematic things that I'm interested in. And once I can find that and weave that into any story, then
Right.
that's more like creative side. In terms of straight commercial stuff,
Mm-hmm.
like I can definitely just take a script and execute it, and I've done that for commercials. But the work that I do in that space and other spaces that really thrives is when I can kind of like guide my way in, guide the, like step into something. So, I mean, I feel like I definitely have certain motifs and certain things that I draw for all the time. For example, it's funny, my brother Niall, who's also a filmmaker, just mentioned it to me again because I'm writing a treatment right now. And at somewhere along the line in my story, the protagonist has to go up the hill to go link the Rasta man them and Naya Bingi and hold a reasoning and lick the chalice 2 times and, have that moment of rebirth.
Yes.
That moment of rebirth is classical storytelling. You go meet your mentor, you
Yes.
find Joseph Campbell, any type of storytelling. For me, I kind of have now assigned that because of its relevance in my own life,
Yes.
And because from a storytelling perspective, it fits a certain classic thing. You literally are going up the mountain, the drums are playing, it's chanting, it's a purity, and that's something that as a kid, I used to go to Nanding with my parents, and all night you just run around the place and like,
Yeah.
so I do try to find things that mean something to me that I've experienced viscerally in my history. Right. I try to imagine that in a way where it fits into storytelling that can have a global across the way appeal. And that's kind of how I try to weave Caribbean life
into the commercial work,
into the commercial world. I definitely have come to realize that mastering, like you can, to have your very specific style, if you can master the larger approaches, you can kind of master how all the classic tools of storytelling that are tried and true, then you can kind of break them apart and start to mold in your own approach, and I try to, that's kind of how I do it, because for me, I'm never making stuff for a small audience. I'm making stuff for the most eyeballs possible at all point in time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time you're doing that, you're also very much representing in your work things that are very Jamaican, to put it crassly, but at the same, but also being able to connect to international themes through those things. As you said, Anaya Bingi happens in a very particular space and time in certain small spaces, but people may be able to recognize the journey of the hero within that that particular way of the way you tell a story. So I find that very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and just wanted to add on to that, I find the local can be more global. The more culturally specific the thing is, can actually translate more globally, because you increase that sense of discovery when you're showing something that's so culturally specific. But if you understand the way how global audiences like receive and engage with storyline, and you can weave our style into it, I think that's where the beautiful cross sections are. You know what I mean?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
So I think in your introductions, you actually did kind of explore my first question, which was around the idea of how innate, as a Caribbean person, how innate is that in the work that you create. I wanted to take a different perspective and ask, are there ever instances where you try to move away from that idea of being Caribbean? Are there ever instances in either the work you create or teaching, as I know Paul does, but certainly Rudolph, maybe you've been in that space as well. Are there ever instances where you actively and consciously move away from the idea of Black or Caribbean? Just to kind of see if there's a different perspective to the question. Christopher, do you have a sense?
I'd say as the actor, I remember years ago when we were studying Shakespeare, one of the things we had to do as actors was to kind of not think about ourselves as, first of all, Black Jamaicans who were from the Caribbean.
Sure.
You literally had to, I know my process was to watch a lot of British theatre films, and also to just try to transpose myself to the era of the time, and then try to bring your European self forward as the actor, which was a lot of work to do. But it worked for us because that was the method that took us to getting into characters. So I could play Rosencrantz or Guildenstern, all those characters from Shakespeare. So yes, in improvisational classes, when you're asked to do accents and so on, you have to kind of mentally take yourself outside of the Caribbean, and so that I can draw on in this conversation. Outside of that, I haven't tried to break away from who I am in terms of my Caribbeanness.
Please.
Go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Well, it's very interesting that you should say that, because I have been involved in quite a number of Shakespeare plays over here with the Royal Shakespeare Theatre Company. But on every occasion, I was fortunate enough to work with, for instance, the late Jonathan Miller, who was, as they say, the creme de la creme in directing here in the UK and in the States. And on every one of those occasions, the directors have said to me, I don't want you to be a Royal Shakespeare Theatre actor, which is something, in the early days of training over here, as a young actor, you start speaking, Shakespeare. And it was music to my ears.
Right.
Because what they actually said to me, not only Jonathan Miller, there was another director, David Thacker, and he said, look, what I want, you are in the UK, what I want is for you, first of all, we had an exercise where you took the lines of Shakespeare, and you improvised using your own words. So we improvised a lot of Othello using our own words. And now he said to me, what I want you to do now is to use the text. You are bringing something unique. You're not bringing Laurence Olivier, you're not bringing Richard Burton, you are bringing something unique to Shakespeare. You're bringing yourself.
Yes.
You're bringing a guy whose background is totally different. And that is the beauty of Shakespeare. All we are dealing with is love, hatred, and you get that emotions right across the globe. So I, at no stage in all my experiences, especially in the professional theater, and it's what I talked about earlier on, in that I don't want to walk on stage and they're seeing a Black Englishman. I wasn't born in the UK. I was born in Trinidad.
Yes.
My background is there. So what I introduce, or what I've introduced over the years in most of the work that I have done, is a different culture, a rich, hopefully a richness. So, I mean, and I could imagine, yes, if you're in Jamaica or Trinidad, you would probably, yes, you will explore Shakespeare as it was done 100 years ago. But certainly in the UK, my approach was completely different.
And that is certainly what would make you unique, in that you are, because you are applying that, again, if we call it Caribbean identity, to the work that you're doing, that actually would make you unique in that space. So I imagine that would be very special, and something you would therefore not want to step away from.
Not at all, but mind you, I was warned that, on one occasion that before the press night, that I'll be subjected to severe criticism from certain sections of the press.
Yeah.
And I was warned before that, and believe you me, that is exactly what happened.
The traditionalists.
Of course. But I rode with that, and yeah.
Wonderful. Paul, what about you as an actor of stage, screen? What is it for you? Do you ever feel the need to step away from the Caribbean identity, the Black identity in the work that you do?
Well, I think that's very interesting what Mr. Walker and Christopher is bringing up, because I think what I have learned, what I have come to understand and learn myself, is whenever you step away from that, you get in trouble. And the more success that I've gotten personally was being true to that essence of who you are. Yeah. And I think, but I think the industry is such that it gives cues that what you are isn't enough, and what you're bringing isn't enough, and what you bring doesn't have the same value as what we see on TV and what we see represented and what we see getting awards and being acknowledged, Yes. So it's very easy to feel like what you're offering isn't sufficient, and that you have to lose something and gain something else in order to have success, or to put food on the table, or to get the job. When the irony is, the very thing that makes you unique and makes you get the bad reviews or whatever is the thing that gets you noticed. And at the end of the day, it's about standing out for who you are. And I think I think standing out for who you are, if everyone is giving you applause or you're getting good reviews, that something is not quite right. You are disrupting the space, and I think that disruption is crucial. And I think part of the issues, at least for me personally, it is a post-colonial space, right? And I think that comes with it a certain baggage, or certain ideas that we're unlearning. And actually, it took me coming to America and living and finding out to kind of unlearn a lot of those things and to come back home, so to speak.
Yes.
And I value that and appreciate that. And I think, I think that's very important. I think standing in who you are is crucial. And again, I say who you are, not necessarily like you have to be this flag bearer of Caribbean-ness, but you are who you are as a human being, and you bring interesting tones and colors and whatever else that happen to be part of your experience. That's the same way as an Irishman, an Englishman, and because everyone tells stories from where they're from. Although it's Martin Scorsese is talking about Italian stories in a certain area of New York City. It's very idiosyncratic. It's very local.
New York City.
Yeah, The Godfather is a very local movie.
Yeah.
Goodfellas is a very local film. It just happens to be a classic because of the infrastructure and how evolved their machinery is to communicate their stories. But they're all independent cinema, if you think about it. So
always coming back to truth, which is I like that. Even though I kind of asked the question, it does seem to come back to truth for all of you so far. Storm, what about you? Do you ever step outside of that, of your identity as a Jamaican, as a Caribbean man? Do you ever step outside of that in the work that you create?
I would say that, you know, one thing is, you know, because films take so long to get made, you know, when it's like you're planning a story, when you're thinking about the idea, you know, you're probably 3 years away from it actually hitting.
Yeah.
So a certain amount of having to like try to imagine the future, because if you feel like this is a relevant idea now, is it going to be relevant in 3 years? So you kind of have to be like, how do I read what's going to be becoming more relevant, etc.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about things that are either timeless or are increasing in relevance.
Okay.
Same time, you know, based on where I'm located, you know, and America's right there, my natural route to, you know, the more larger, you know, getting your work further out is Hollywood, you know. I've been kind of like knocking at the fucking door, you know what I mean, winning the awards, been around the edge, but not really at the major festivals. But then 2 years later, everyone's like, this is the film that should have, you know what I mean? Like you're always trying to break into this thing. Caribbean people even are more like culturally aware than a lot of American people. Like I've definitely been in situations where people don't know what's good. They just know it's sexy and Jamaican, and they don't really even know if it's good, especially if it's subtle. So like I definitely had a situation where I felt like, you know, a certain film would have gotten into a festival and they can only take one Jamaican film at a time, but that one had, you know, sex, violence, and certain level of things, and this one they couldn't see how relevant this was.
Yeah,
you know
they couldn't put it in a box.
Exactly. So I find like for me, it's not like I step out, but I am constantly, you know, and when people decide whether I am the director to choose for this project, it's like your work is so great, it impacts me, but then they have to, it's not, you know, like to take that, can you now direct this totally American thing? Are you just Mr. Caribbean stuff? You know, or so, you know, I think if I was like American or like I'd lived or like grown up in LA or whatever, it might have been different. It would just be like, what story are you telling?
Yeah.
I'm definitely trying to tell something that is true to my thing. It's gonna knock up the place in that place, and it's gonna find a space where I can play in that game. So it's a constant back and forth. The funny thing about this is you'll be developing projects for years, and at the beginning of your pitching process, people be asking you questions like, so do the characters ever like go to the US, or is there a way to put a name talent into it, right?
Yes, yeah.
Then over the years you think about it and you find a way, and then when you're pitching it now and I just find it like, no, but like, why are you trying to get them to the US? What's cool about it is it's all in Jamaica, and you're like,
because you're trying to change. The trend has changed, yeah.
You know what I mean? But the times change, the tastes change. Hollywood, as much as you think it's a leader place, it's a follower place, right? You just have to get into the position to like be the one who show them what's next.
Absolutely.
That's
absolutely. I do want to ask a question, kind of thinking about the context of the festival and the conversations that have been happening. What does the idea of Black consciousness mean to each of you? We've been talking about identity, Caribbean identity, and Black consciousness, especially in the context of each of you working and living in spaces outside of the Caribbean. How important has Black consciousness been as part of your own journeys? Christopher,
I'll start. Well, my very first scholarship that I ever won in my life was from the Marcus Garvey Foundation. It was given to me by Sister Miriam Samad, late sister. And that started a long journey for me into reading about Marcus Garvey, finding out a little bit more about who this man was, and my journey into Black consciousness. The very first production I did outside of my primary school was, I think, a show called Cry Freedom, or it was about slavery back in the time. And so as working with historians who were dramatists. And that just continued, that whole fodder of me playing, doing Caribbean stories, historically based stories, continued right throughout my teenage life. And so it's kind of unmistakable how history became a part of what I like to study and read about.
Right.
And so Black consciousness, it has been a very strong part of who I am, and just understanding who we are as a people, and being a part of that creative side of the Jamaican culture through theater has always been my thing. One of the things that directors liked to put me in when I was really into the thick of theater back in the day were reviews, musical reviews, because of how easily I'm able to switch from singing the Jamaican cultural songs and making some of them even more currently relevant, bringing them from or historically developed music like Mento or ska, and then bringing that to a more dancehall feel,
right,
performing those songs live on stage and doing the dance moves. And I was pretty much known for being able to be the change, the switch from music to dance to doing the prose. So it's really been a very serious part of my grounding, I think, as a performer.
As a performer. Having a sense of that historical, let's say, line, because as you say, the culture of Jamaica is so rich, and so much of the history of the country impacts, how the culture is developed. So you having a strong line to that is very much part of who you are as a performer. Yeah. Paul, I want to throw to you. I'm conscious of the time, and I know you may have to leave us soon. So I want to ask you the same question. What does the idea of Black consciousness mean to you, especially in the context of living abroad, outside of the Caribbean for some time?
I think Black consciousness to me became more apparent when I left Trinidad and came to the US. Because I think the nature of the space and what it is in the history of the United States, it really defines itself a lot through race and color in a very different way than we do back home in the Caribbean. It's very, very politically charged. Not that it isn't in Trinidad and the Caribbean as well. I mean, there are those cultural.
We have different divides. We have different things that potentially divide us.
Indeed. But it's not something that we go about necessarily proclaiming or defending in the same way as they do in the US. And I guess my thought on it is, on the one hand, yes. I mean, I think I am very proud of who I am and that recognition and consciousness of that. But I think there is a side to it that I think because of the history of Black people and people of African descent over the years, and there's this kind of connection to struggle and slavery and all of that, and I often wonder to what extent is this a Black consciousness, and that is how much of it is connected or vis-a-vis that history and that struggle, and I am curious and interested in, not insofar as moving past, because that's what I'm saying, is an acknowledgement of that and a respect and not forgetting that past, but also where is, for me, Black consciousness is a transcending, do you know, and how do we now continue to see the fullness of who we are, and the diversity, the depth, the complexity of who we are, which is our history and the beautiful future we get to design. Because I think I think in freedom, right? I think in freedom comes certain responsibilities that I think that we as a people need to we need to continue to step into that. And I think people like Mr. Walker is like a trailblazer in that sense, that he's beaten the path, so to speak, as someone who has made his way in a very, very complicated world. And I see like Storm and the work Storm is doing with his stories. I think the more that we are able to step into those roles and to beat our own path and to create our own lane, whether they come or not, you know, they come or not, it's fine.
Yes.
You know, it's like, but I think I think other groups, I just feel like it's very important. And it's something that I'm also kind of thinking about myself and my own self. How do you now boldly tap into higher consciousness, super consciousness, and trust in that, in creating our path, and not worry about who else says is good or not. Do you know what I mean? Because we have that potential to do that. And I just think sometimes there is this, I wonder is this, how much of it is this connection to a struggle and a history that is not fully liberating us? Do you know what I'm saying? And I'm really, and I love some of the things that's happening now with many Black artists in terms of their consciousness and how that's liberating expression and art form unapologetically in the way we want to define ourselves in the future, however that looks like. That's a very roundabout answer, but
No, thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. Rudolph, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's so eloquently put. Well done. I mean, Black consciousness for me, wasn't it amazing when I got on board the boat from Trinidad in 1960.
Yes.
I traveled with a brilliant Jamaican writer who became a very, very close friend. He's no longer with us, Trevor Rohn. We were both traveling to the UK to further our career. And on board this Dutch vessel, there was separation in that we, the Black guys, were down in the hold and the white passengers were above. And we decided to, and it's something that we couldn't live with for too long.
Yeah.
So we got together and we decided to put on a show and invite the upper deck to come down and view the show. And they said, no. I'm kind of abbreviating the story. They said, no, come upstairs and perform for us. So we did poems, we did little sketches. And after that, we had the run of the ship until we arrived in the UK.
Right.
Now, Black consciousness was thrust upon us, thrust upon me.
Yes.
Because looking for digs, you came across no Blacks, no Irish, no dogs.
Yeah.
And in a strange sort of way, it set me on the path of really being Black conscious.
I would imagine so. You can't with an introduction like that.
Yeah.
You can't be anything else.
I couldn't be anything else.
Yeah.
So really what it did, quite the reverse, it gave me a determination, it gave me an inner strength, just to battle and to face all the obstacles. And there were many, many obstacles, but the more obstacles that was thrown at me as a young Black actor, young Black Trinidadian, the more obstacles that they threw at me is the more determined and the more confidence that I got. And I would just throw this in my very first appearance in the theater in the UK. Again, after I was still at evening classes and drama classes, and I was suggested by the tutor to go along for this particular part. And I said, no, I only just arrived. I mean, anyhow, to cut a story short, I went along. And I remember the first night that I walked on stage, the thought that went through my mind is that God, I am now going to perform to an audience of an all-white,
Right.
all-white audience. In fact, I only had two of my people who were sharing the same house with me, one from St. Lucia and the other one from Dominica.
Right.
We were sharing, and apart from that, the entire audience, 300 to 400, they were all white. What got into me before I walked on stage, I said, Rudolph, this is it. And I walked on stage feeling 10 feet tall. You have to look at me. I am this guy from Trinidad. And so I build on that. So every turn I take in life in the UK, it was with a sense of consciousness, a sense of pride. But I think the problem that we face, and I faced back in the 60s through the 70s, is that not a lot of people come along with you.
In what way?
Well, it was always a case of each for his own, each man for himself.
Yes.
It's what we face in society, and it's great, this Black Lives Matter movement that has started. And it is so refreshing to see so many of the youngsters, the young actors, the young, whatever walk of life, getting together with one goal. And that is enough is enough. We have to move forward as a body. And what I felt over the many years is that we are so divided. And that is weakness. It weakens our progress. It weakens our what we are capable of achieving. Am I?
No, I hear that. I think it was Paul who had said about the idea of division not being something that we really are able to use to move forward. So
Exactly.
That it's the post-colonial mentality that we see repeating in the way that we do things in the Caribbean, and again, it's one of the struggles that I think we collectively face, because there's a lack of consciousness sometimes to how you function, because you're going through the motions, and the moment that we do seem to be in now, which may be triggered by Black Lives Matter, but certainly I think in different places and spaces, this consciousness and this awakening has been happening. It's putting us all in a space of being able to wear that consciousness more clearly on our chests or on our shoulders.
Exactly.
And I would also say, Rudolph, that we know the complicated history that the UK has with the Caribbean. And I'm sure that you blazing that path, you would have been, as has been said, representation matters in the creative industries and in creative spaces. And you certainly would have been that, that person for a lot of young actors, I'm sure, and a lot of young creatives to show that they could do it as well. So I'm curious.
Yes, I'm just burning to say, because Paul kind of took me in a direction, and I wanted to just say that I totally feel what Paul was saying in terms of an eagerness to take the sacrifices and the work that was laid down before by people like Rudolph and those who were trailblazers, to move it to a next level, to take all that work that was done before, to move the Black consciousness now to an active action level, where we douse down on that Willie Lynch syndrome that keeps dividing us, and really pulls us together in collaboration and cooperation. And I think more of that will hopefully happen with the sense of consciousness that I'm seeing rise up. One of the things I'm hoping for is that it spills over in the Caribbean some more, because we tend here, because we don't face the same kind of obvious racial issues that keep the subject in our faces so much, or in our consciousness, this divide. But I hope that we in the Caribbean can work more at even working together some more, and to identify the fact that we too have our own issues when it comes to Black consciousness.
Absolutely.
You see, I go along with that, and as an 81-year-old, 80-plus-old actor, it fills with a lot of pleasure to hear, you all making that sort of rhetoric. I think it's fantastic. The source of disappointment for me is that many, many, many years ago, I say many years, going back to the 70s, on one of my many visits to Trinidad, I tried to encourage the powers that be in Trinidad, vis-a-vis Trinidad and Tobago television, that I am fed up of coming to the Caribbean and watching things that were being created in America and in the UK. And I told the powers that be then that we have the talent to do something of our own that should be reverse, should be going. I should be sitting in the UK and watch something from the Caribbean rather than the old. And maybe it was before its time. But that was a source of regret from each time I went down to Trinidad and I put these ideas, that we could work collectively, not just in Trinidad. Because I suggested that we work throughout the Caribbean. We can come together as a Caribbean entity and do something, or do things, be it a soap opera, be it a thing. We have the talent, we have the subject, we have everything going for us. It wasn't adhered to.
Instead, I just like to say, you can stream Sprinter right now on Sky TV in the UK. So
it's happening.
Yeah.
If you want to catch it, that was made here by us,
As I said, Storm is representing all of us with the work that he is doing, because the path of Caribbean creatives getting work out that's a work in progress. So the fact that Storm has been able to do it with 2 of his feature films is actually quite incredible. I'll actually want to throw to Storm, and obviously everyone else, please chime in. What do you think, Storm, is the role of creating of the content that you create? What is the role of that content in effecting change in community, whether it's in Jamaica specifically, or let's talk about that since that's where you are, but your films also travel. So what do you think is the role of the content you create in effecting change, especially in the context of a moment that we are in right now globally, where there are so many systems being upended, ideas being overturned? What do you think is the role of that content in affecting that change?
Well, before you answer, I just want to say I have to run. This is an amazing conversation. I'm so sorry I have to leave, but it's a pleasure being in your company, everyone.
It's a pleasure, blessings.
Pleasure to have met you, Paul.
Stay safe.
So in terms of, there's been very visceral reaction to the content in like a very immediate way, and then I think there's like, what's the larger reaction as it seeps into the culture? And I've had different experiences with both of my films. Better Must Come, which for those who don't know, it's about politics and gangs in the 1970s in Jamaica during the Cold War era. And then of course, Sprinters about track and field, and also a lot about immigration. So, I've had experiences where I remember when Better Must Come opened in the movie theaters in Regal in New York, in Times Square. And I was at one of the opening screenings, and there was a guy who during the Q&A, he started asking about the JLP and Edward Seaga and all that, this terrorism that really happened in Jamaica during that time. And the man could not, clearly he had lost people in this war. Clearly it had something probably to do with why he had left. And when I tell you, said this man flew into a rage where he could not stop. When is Seaga going to be indicted for war crimes? I mean, he had to leave the cinema. Now, this was like, with that first film, for example, they don't teach us in Jamaica about the Cold War that took place in Jamaica in the 70s into 80s. That's not nothing we learn in high school. In high school history, I can tell you about some old British wars that them teach
Yeah.
you, right? But I can't tell you that, you know, in the mid 70s, there was, you know, the CIA essentially tried to undermine Jamaica, destroyed many of our major industries, fomented civil war, caused, you know, a very like you know, great trajectory that a nation was on to really kind of stop and readjust. Now, that's something that was kind of hidden. You don't even hear about it in the stories of crazy Cold War things that happened. You hear about Chile, you hear about other places, you don't hear about Jamaica.
You'll hear about Jamaica. Yeah.
But this film now was the generation of people who left the country because of that are now seeing it for the first time viscerally on the screen, right? The generation of children born in the US, Canada, England, where they're the children of the parents who left, right? They're now for the first time after saying, no, it making sense. They always told me about this GLP, PNP and how dangerous that was what I heard, but now I just saw it. And so now like entire journeys of people and families and change trajectories, the film is helping, is like a clear kind of document that is showing it to you, and is also opening a door now that you can now go onto YouTube, go and do your own research. So I've had those instances. I had people, I remember when Sprinter showing work in London at the BFI, South Bank, multiple projects. I remember a woman saying, no, she left Jamaica in 1960, I believe. Same time that Rudolph would have left Trinidad. Same time, I think my dad left Jamaica actually and eventually came back. He went to England as well. But saying it was the first time she had seen these memories, this landscape that she had remembered, shown so cinematically, and she wanted to go back. You know, so the work coming out of the Caribbean is like it means so much to Caribbean people who are no longer here. You know what I mean? And Caribbean diasporic people are majorly influential in so many other spaces and so many other cultures. So there's that. And, you know, I mean, yeah, I you know, like there's I could keep going on and on, but I've had these, and then in terms of other situations, like I also did a screening in Toronto recently of Sprinter to high school kids, right? A lot of high school kids who are also track kids, who are also of Jamaican parentage, but don't know nothing about it because it's not in their face. And they're seeing themselves in these high school characters, you know what I mean? And they're getting more interested in that and kind of holding that. So there's that very visceral thing. In another sense, showing Caribbean characters outside of this norm, where like a rap artist will come and do a music video in Jamaica because that means they're tough and hard, and you see some dog that run through garbage and some bad man, and you're like, yeah. And that is
all the good stereotypes.
Right, that's what they get in the culture. But then you watch a movie like, say, Sprinter, and it's just a kid trying to make a team, trying to get back to his mom. He's not from the ghetto poor. He's not trying to, he's actually in a pretty good circumstance, so to speak, but he's dealing with the emotional turmoil of being away from a parent, and it's something that is so commonplace in the Caribbean that people don't even look at it like an issue. And it's so normal. So I had a lot of people saying, man, this is just so normal. And I think that is radical. I think showing very normal Caribbean people that not fighting to make it out of some crazy circumstance is actually radical in its impact, in also the perception of other people who are not from there, and just the reinforcement of Caribbean people who know that we're not all crazy, like dancehall, for example, and some of our, Jamaica has done a lot. And Batman archetype. I know.
Yes, you contributed a lot to that stereotype. But yes, there is more. There's obviously a lot more beyond the stereotypes that we sometimes can be reduced to as the Caribbean. And I have to say that Storm, which is about the time that we met when you were on your journey with Better Must Come, Storm was pretty much chief cook and bottle washer on this film, which when you look at it, you would not be able to tell that you had a role in every single aspect of it, because this was your literal baby.
Yeah.
And it is a piece of work that I was very impressed by when I saw it, because again, the documentation of a time in Caribbean history that we don't learn about in school, you know, and not just necessarily lens through your own eyes, but because it's a period film, you're actually pulling yourself a bit out of the story and thinking about it through people who actually experienced it, which, you know, so kudos to you for that piece of work, and obviously everything you've done since then. But I do feel that's a seminal piece of work that I could see could have that impact on community, not just here, but in the diaspora as well. Rudolph, what about you?
What about me?
The idea of the work that you've done, let's say, how have you been able to identify the work that you have done in the UK affecting change in your community?
Yes, undoubtedly it has. And everything that I have done so far, most things that I have done so far, and of course I can highlight the two obvious things, although it's dated now, and you would dare not show it, and that was the series that was successful for about 4 or 5 years, Love Thy Neighbor, the comedy series. Simply because of what it did, it brought racism right to the fore. It was done humorously. It was a topic of conversation. It was highly successful for that period. You dare not do something like that now. But there were 3 things. There was that. I also did a television series called Black Silk. And this is to do with a barrister. And the great thing about that, it went right into the heart of the legal system and exposed the racism within the legal system. And this was back in the 80s. And out of that came, the Association of Black Barristers. It exposed the barristers, the difficulty they had in getting pupillage. It hopefully opened a lot of doors. And of course, recently in the last 19 or 20 years, EastEnders, which, of course, is one of those things that you see 4 nights a week. And what has come out of that is the fact that it's something that is unique in British television, is to have a Black family or Black individual in your house 4 days a week in a central character for 19 or 20 years. And the spin-offs for things like that, which I think is important to me, is that I am able to go into a lot of schools and do run my foundation, where I try and encourage youngsters, especially in areas where there are problems, and try and give them some sort of encouragement that that I have achieved this, and each and every one of you all are capable of doing the same. Yeah. So there are there are spin-offs, and I use that platform to do that, with my foundation. Okay. So yes, I would like to think that the work that I have done over the years and still continue to do is of benefit to a lot of the youngsters.
Good. Do you think that that Love Thy Neighbor could be made today?
No.
Why is that?
Simply because that don't forget, we are dealing in the period where we were calling each other's names. Today you got to be politically correct. And I think in a way it's probably gone too far, but that's not for me to judge. But there we are. That's the reality. That's what it is today. I wouldn't be involved in something like that today. Although one of the things that the phrase or the catchphrase that I think that we are missing, that is so sad, is that the phrase "love thy neighbor." Forget the fact is back. Yes. Right. You see, it is such a powerful statement to make in our society. Love your neighbor as you would love yourself.
With
And
no
that is what,
qualifiers, not based
yeah,
on race, not based, no qualifiers at all. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So Christopher, can I ask you the same question? How do you think that the work that you do, or creative work on the whole, can really have an impact on your community?
You know, as a child star in Jamaica, what I've discovered over the years is how much the work that we did back in those days, the Lime Tree Lane days, the years between 1988 and the next decade that came after that,
right,
had influenced a generation of creatives, not just actors, but also a new generation of producers, and folks who wanted to produce local content,
right.
which is something I heard Rudolph talk about. In Jamaica, we've really have, I think, have put the fire under the vibrancy of producing local content. And that is why I think you've seen so much more coming out of Jamaica, not just in films, but also in music videos. We have a thriving music video production, crew and so on. As a stand-up comedian, I've influenced, certainly directly, I think, the new generation of comics coming out of Jamaica. And we did that quite consciously, because when I was about, let's say, about 7-8 years ago, I recognized that on the comedic market, that we really didn't have a lot of Jamaicans who were aspiring to be stand-up comedians,
right,
and serious about it. And so I started several things. I started a television series that I co-executively produced called Comedy Boss. And through that series came at least 5 or 6 folks who are now bona fide stand-up comics / actors coming out of Jamaica. And now I've continued to press that energy by having started Jamaica's longest running stand-up comedy open mic show, which is something that we didn't really have on the landscape in Jamaica before, which was a weekly running open mic stand-up comedy place that we could gather and do comedy from and grow as comedians. And that has led me to open a space now, literally for creatives, including stand-up comedians and thespians and so on, which is becoming quite a sought after space, because it's becoming one of the few spaces we have left for creatives to actually gather. It's called Johnny's Place, and we kind of worked on that through COVID. So I think over the years we've been able to influence some of the younger actors, certainly some comedians of late coming through, and what I love to feel is when I do travel and get a response, not necessarily from anybody from the Caribbean, about projects that we're doing in Jamaica. I was recently featured in an international magazine about the work I'm doing in stand-up comedy, and it was nice. It was nice to get that kind of a response from work that you've been doing, not necessarily looking for that kind of attention, but really seriously focusing on developing local talent, stand-up comedians that can do their work and ply their trade, not just in the island of Jamaica, but across the Caribbean and across the diaspora as well.
But I mean, that's impressive, because I mean, I said it before, but the idea that representation matters is actually a true thing. For us in Trinidad and Tobago, I guess, in terms of people wanting to get involved in film, a lot of it would have started in the 80s with TTT and Banyan Productions, and a lot of local content being created for our one TV station, that we all had to watch. But the sense of, let's say, identity, I think for a lot of us of a certain generation, I think was formed by that in the 80s. I think each of the Caribbean islands probably has that, whatever that thing was that made you, really sort of feel your Jamaican self or your Trinidad self or your Caribbean self. I think a lot of it had to do with what we saw on the screen. Storm, I actually want to ask you, both Christopher and Rudolph touched on this idea of training the next generation, or being that idea of a model, whether intentional or not, to creatives coming next. Where do you fit in? Where do you see yourself in that idea? You do so much work, both in terms of your commercial work and your creative work. Where do you see yourself in terms of the community of creatives and also young business people who want to work in the film industry? Where do you see yourself fitting into that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely know that, and I've been told that, some of the, I know that work I've been doing has been inspirational to folks, they've expressed that to me. And I think, for example, like just, even with Sprinter, and Jamaican people are a very tough crowd, Can Mr. Jamaican people stand up on some big artists in a stage show where, anywhere else them artists go, everyone going, and Jamaican just stand up there, So they have this very, they have this very specific way. But, and even with Sprinter, which had a bit of a festival run and created a bit of waves before anyone could even see it in Jamaica. And it did eventually show in cinemas here. But, the era of cinemas and people going to the movie theaters, it's kind of post-movie theater era. You go as an event moment. But a lot of people, you see, when the movie reached Netflix, that is when the movie really come out to people. That is when everybody's like, oh my God, this is so great. And can you imagine? And you know what it was? There's a part of it is that it's knowing what Netflix means, the top streaming service.
The value of that brand.
The value of that brand. And then now, our thing, they're right there, so, in there, on the list beside whoever, Denzel, like whoever, like, in this age, especially how we interact and take in information, the power of brands, the power of, certain things, it means a lot. So now, yesterday, you just thought, a lot of people like, oh man, me never know it going to be so good, Me never know it ever so good. Me didn't think the boy is a Jamaican movie and it go, all right. Meanwhile, that must come as like practically 10 years ago. So I figure like you must think that something will come like good, But there's new generations and we're still working our way out to that whole our team as good as
exactly.
But now when our team stand upside of the boom, now all of a sudden people are like, whoa, this is amazing. So I know that broke down not only for people who are not connected to film, even to my fellow filmmakers that are actively working on it, because they know me. We work on set together. We know each other. They're like, your thing up on Netflix, blood clot, my thing can up on Netflix too. It's not out of reach. Even
it's not out of reach anymore.
Even people who are super talented, who are like operating on a high level, there's still these barriers that you imagine. So I feel like the most important role I do is to make sure the work I'm putting out is really good, is good enough. If I don't even teach a class, if I at least cut a path and carve out some space in this thing for proving that our work can get there, I will have, I know, done a lot. But I also, on a personal level, I definitely, I speak a lot. I've taught at UWI. I think I was the first filmmaker in residence at UWI in Jamaica. And I've definitely like tried to give direct knowledge as much as possible. There are filmmakers who are writers in my class at UWI that are just gotten their movies that they were developing in my class years ago, just got made. So, this is the thing. I gave examples, right? When you think of like emerging film industries, like Nigeria, major film industry, and is now, pretty international. Now, Nigeria have a lot of people, about 60 million people, right? Or something like that, or a whole heap of million of people. Maybe that's actually wrong. Maybe it's more. But the point is, they have so many people that they can just make their projects in the country, distribute it to their own people, and make back the money, and the economic model works in terms of what it costs to make film. And they've refined that. Now, my belief is that we don't have enough people in the Caribbean basin, or at least enough people paying the streamers here
Yeah.
to justify the budgets for some of the things that we want to create.
Would like to do.
So
Yeah.
for me, it's how do we make our story, like we have to swing for the sky every time. Like we can't shoot with a machine gun. We have to shoot with a sniper rifle and make sure say we're knocking it every time, because that's the only way we're gonna break through.
Yes.
And I try a lot to do that in my work, and I try to break down the mystery of what it takes to do this to other people. I try to give very practical knowledge, because people think filmmaking is like a magic thing to them. They don't understand how it happens. They want to be a part of it, but how on earth does this work? You don't realize willpower is most of it, and especially now people have people have access to a lot of the technology that you can make something. If you have a good enough story, you can do something with your phone that can go viral, so it's just trying to get over to people that making sure your story is solid. I try to impart, making sure that, I try to impart certain things that will propel you. So that's how I feel like that's what I think my role is, two-tier. My role is to do the work that is going to speak for me and beyond and speak for all of us. And whenever I get the chance to give direct knowledge, I do it, because I got direct knowledge from certain people that changed me. People like Perry Hensel. The harder they come, obviously. Well, not many weeks before he passed, I went and I spoke to him. I've told the story a few times, but I was editing a scene in Better Must Come, and everyone loved the scene, but it made me cringe a little bit. Something about the performance didn't really hit, and I cringed, but everybody loved it. And I say, Perry, I'm having this issue, man. I mean, what do you do when you cringe? Everybody says it's great, but you feel it. And Perry just looked at me, no bullshit, and he said, when I cringe, I cut, right? And I've taken it from then, and now when I cringe, I cut. And
it has to stay true to you. It has, as Paul was saying consistently, it has to be true for you.
Yeah. So I try to translate those things that people can take and move with and create good work,
So the time has flown. We've been talking for nearly an hour and a half, believe it or not. And so we have time for one more round of questions. I do want to actually just acknowledge one of our listeners who's saying that in terms of the Caribbean audience, we do have the diaspora, which is, I think Jamaica's tried, but we've not been able to find a way, I think, in the Caribbean to really leverage the diaspora the way we should. Because those numbers would make a lot more sense on the business side to people who are, who could then be made interested in Caribbean content. If you put the diaspora into that mix, it's a different set of numbers.
Yeah, it punches us up to about 30-something million people.
But we've not yet found a way to make that happen. I hope that's something that can happen. But from an industry business side, the numbers are what Netflix, Amazon, any major distributor is looking at what the numbers are. It makes sense for me to invest in this. And in the Caribbean, I think we still have some work to do to leverage the fact that we could potentially come together to do this. And maybe, trying to go at it alone, at least in this instance, is not necessarily going to get us very far.
Yep.
So. So then on that note, I am kind of coming back to our theme in terms of Black consciousness. I did want to ask each of you as a last question. Globally, we are at a tipping point, and we have been for some time, but certainly this year in 2020, it seems to have, it's bubbling, right? And we know everything that's going on. For young people who are people younger than us who are trying to break into the creative industries, I think in this moment where, Black Lives Matter and all versions of that's relevant to our regions, what advice or what guidance would you give to young people trying to work professionally in the creative industries, be it film, theater, etc., in the context of this moment of, I suppose, wearing your Blackness or wearing your identity more clearly on your chest? What advice would you have for people like that right now? Christopher.
Okay. the last part of the way you phrased the question got me thinking on a level. But what I would say to young people is, first of all, you're living in a time when I think it's pretty much the easiest time to jump in and showcase your expression. You can literally use your phone to do a skit or a performance and to put it out there. So we're living at a time when information and sharing of that information is quite easy to do. A lot of starting takes will, and like I've always said, is you literally start by doing. You start by taking that first step, and so that's what I encourage you to do. Start by doing that thing that feels most natural to you, and go with that. Stay true to that, and start singing, start acting, start reciting, start dancing, and then also seek to improve yourself in the best way that you can. So always strive to put your best work out there and to improve yourself in the best possible way. And sometimes don't necessarily think about what's going to happen. You know, I remember when I was younger, there was this freedom that I had that made me feel like I was flying creatively.
Yeah.
And it was that time when I think I had the I don't know, I guess probably the most creative freedom of my time, because people saw that energy and felt that energy from me. And that's when I think I really inspired and got a lot of people on my side in terms of helping me to propel me, to push me into other projects.
Yeah.
And I learned so many valuable lessons. And so one of the things I said is, yes, we're living in a very toxic sometimes time when it comes to race and Black consciousness, and it can feel a little bit overbearing sometimes as to, you know, you can even get angry about some of the things you're seeing, but don't lose sight of your own personal ambition. And this may sound a bit controversial, but don't necessarily get sidetracked too much by the Blackness, because you are a part of the global world as well. You know, your work that you do may just touch many lives outside of people who are outside of your race.
Yes.
So create, and maybe that creation will touch so many people that it helps to propel this very argument about Black consciousness that we're talking about.
Yes.
So produce. This is your time.
Thank you, Christopher. Storm, what would you say to young people in this moment who want to work in creative industries and could be also influenced by what's happening globally?
Well, I would say it's pretty clear that we're living in the age of, it's like the age of information and communication power. Like data is more valuable now than any valuable mineral. You know what I mean? Like that's now the most valuable thing is companies selling data.
Yes.
What that means is like the most valuable thing is your ability to communicate to the broadest group or to focus your communication. Your ability to tell a story, basically, whether you realize it or not, is actually become the most powerful asset. I mean, wars are being fought now in the information and communication realm.
Yes.
Wars are being fought and won before they can reach the battlefield because of how propaganda operates and all of these things, propaganda, fake news, it all comes down to storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing that someone writing some fake news article to go change a narrative is trying to tap into is what a screenwriter is trying to tap into you as well. It's trying to find a way to touch the right buttons in you, the audience, to bring you into a story that you can then be committed to, you know. And the power of that was probably more reserved for storytellers and not truth tellers has now been brought into the truth telling world. So anybody who wants to get into this thing, you're basically getting into a world of your skill in telling a story. And if you're going to make money out of it, how can you, the value of applying that to money-making ventures. But I would say whether it's a money-making venture and you're learning how to tell a story that's going to sell a product, or you're learning how to tell a creative story that's going to change hearts and minds, or you're learning how to, like tell a political story to push a movement, it is the most valuable resource. So I would say right now, people need to be, and it's also, and this might seem like divergent, but it comes back, I want to connect it to this idea of Black consciousness. And I wanted to say earlier about when you see that in storytelling. To me, Black consciousness, when it comes to storytelling, is this confidence in our own voice. It's a confidence in the non-European voice of story structure, of what's valuable. It's, you're going to tell a story about duppies. You're not talking about no vampire and a werewolf. You're talking about River Muma. You're talking about some duppy when coming from Africa, you know what I mean? Like, and having the confidence that they are as powerful and mean as much. And in my opinion, they're way more nuanced monsters, so to speak, coming from that space. And I think you see it more in the work now. And you see the backlash of a rising Black consciousness outside of that. So for example, if you step into the space of storytelling, if you look at, pop, look at Beyonce's new visual album. It's all Africa. And it's directors that are speaking with this complete, telling stories with this complete consciousness that is non-European, and they're diving into fantasy, they're diving into Afrofuturism, they're diving into totally African modes of story and empowering that. And this is the biggest pop stars, and this is probably, it's the most valuable popular storytelling thing. At the same time, you have people marching in the streets and calling Black Lives Matter a terrorist group. So you can see the power of our confidence and of the confident and growing storytelling happening on one side, and of the fear that it brings out.
Yes.
In other folks who have always been on the side of the controllers of the narrative. You know what I mean? So for me, I feel like I'm trying to tell youths right now that forget all that thing of like, you need to try and make a thing that feels like this. Your voice is important. What is important about what came before you is to understand the language they use to tell that story, so that you can wield that power to tell your story,
Yes.
Thank you, Tom. Rudolph.
Wow, I'm so proud of you guys. Fantastically well put. I am going to say something very, very simple, and just virtually more or less in 2 or 3 words. And that is regardless of whether we are talking about the film industry, we are talking about artists. I am just addressing the next generation, the youngsters. And 2 simple words that I have used, and that was my school motto: perseverance wins. So whether you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, actor, whatever it is, one of the 2 words that I use and achieve what I wanted: perseverance wins.
Well, you are all definitely proof of that motto. Thank you for sharing that with us, Rudolph. And I think on that note, an hour and a half later, this has been a really interesting conversation. I'm very pleased to have been selected to navigate it. Really, really pleased that you all were able to join us this evening. And I thank you for joining, the audience for joining us. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us and participate in this conversation. And I will now hand over back to Sean. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Nika. Fantastic job you did.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you. Blessings.
Definitely. Thank you to Nika, Rudolph, Christopher, Storm, and of course, Paul. And to all who joined us tonight, make sure to tell a friend, a colleague, or a family member about the festival. Our 20 conversations and cultural activities all throughout the month of November. Coming up this week, tomorrow, we have a Compa Haitian music production workshop with Maestro Ricky, Power Surge, and Fabrice Rousier. On Friday, which is actually Black Consciousness Day in Brazil, we have 5 enthralling conversations starting at 10 a.m. all the way till 7 p.m. The last conversation is Black Consciousness in the Caribbean, Revolution and Writing with Merle Hodge, Kafra Cambon, and Alan Harewood. And on Saturday, we have Tobago and Jazz History with Dr. Charleston Thomas and Justin Peterkin. So stay tuned to all the upcoming events. All of these events are usually at 7 p.m. and you can find all info, links for registration and our events on our website at www.theblackconsciousnessfestival.com. Don't forget to submit the names of your ancestors you'd like to remember on our website's Ancestral Memorial. Thank you for joining and have a good night.
Right. Hold on. Thank you.